Hey everyone, this is Scott Sambucci. You're listening to the Startup Selling Podcast, Talking Sales with Scott Sambucci. That's me. Today, I've got a very, very special guest, not just a very special guest, but a very, very special guest. Today, joining me on our podcast is Marylou Tyler. Marylou Tyler, you might recognize this name. She is the co-author with Aaron Ross of a book called Predictable Revenue, which came out just a few years ago and really took the sales community by storm, especially those in the startup world, as giving a formula and a recipe to really kick off a sales process, particularly as you're launching a new product and trying to find decision makers in your B2B and enterprise sales. Beyond that co-authoring that she did with Ross with Predictable Revenue, Marylou is the founder of Strategic Pipeline, and she works with Fortune 1000 companies on sales process improvement. She works with companies like Apple, Bose, Prudential, UPS, AAA, MasterCard. She's worked with the biggest companies in the world to help them with their sales process. Her book that we're going to talk about today, Predictable Prospecting, How to Radically Increase the Sales Pipeline, is, I will say, as a salesperson, as a sales professional that's read tens, if not hundreds of sales books, this is one of the most practical books I've ever read on sales. So I absolutely positively pick up a copy. If you don't listen to another minute of this podcast, stop what you're doing and go buy a copy of this book called Predictable Prospecting. One last note on about Marylou. In 2016, she was nominated for the very prestigious 20 Women to Watch in Sales Lead Management Award. So when it comes to sales process improvement, Marylou specializes in optimizing that top of funnel sales process, which is why this book is all focused on predictable prospecting. It's all about the top of the funnel and implementing a predictable sales opportunity engine that begins with targeting, engaging, and optimizing the top of your sales funnel. So I'm super excited to have Marylou on the podcast. And without any further ado, let's get over to the conversation with Marylou Tyler.
Good afternoon.
Hey, is that Marylou?
Yes.
Marylou, Scott Sambucci here.
Hey, Scott. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
I am really excited to have you here. I've been reading your book that you just co-wrote with Jeremy Donovan, and I hope you don't mind. We'll just dive right in.
Oh, no. Feel free.
Yeah. So the book, Predictable Prospecting, How to Radically Increase Your B2B Sales Pipeline. I got to tell you, there's a lot of things I love about the book. The one thing I love the most is how practical you get with the book, because one of the biggest challenges and deficiencies I've seen out there, especially in sales books, is that there are like hundreds and thousands of places to get information and ideas, and everybody's like, oh, we should do this or we should try that. But what's really hard is the implementation. And you've gone all the way down to giving salespeople and teams exercises to complete. You've talked about NACS codes, fit factors, crafting an ideal prospect persona. You even have a dial by name directory access chart on how to use a phone system. I was like, oh my gosh, I cannot believe that this is in this book. So I just want to first compliment you and say thank you for the time and effort that it must have taken you and Jeremy to write this book.
It's our pleasure. I mean, it was a labor of love for sure. And I think a lot of it was Jeremy's doing. He was a client of mine at the time and insisted that predictable revenue wasn't complete enough. So after I did my class with him, he said, Marylou, we do really need to write a book, and I'm a great person to write it with you.
Well, I mean, I could see a whole series of books coming out using the predictable, sort of theme there, or the predictable brand, if you will. And for those of the listeners that don't know, many of them have probably read Predictable Revenue that you co-wrote with Aaron Ross, and many people, especially in Silicon Valley, have kind of considered that the Bible of how to start up a sales process to start selling a new product into the market. And that was obviously I think that book has sold something like 50,000 copies. Is that right?
Or more now. I mean, it just keeps, if people keep just discovering it for the first time. So it's amazing how many emails I get saying, I just got your book. And I was thinking the second book, right? And it's like, no, Predictable Revenue. I'm like, oh my gosh. Yeah.
Well,
So,
it's funny you mentioned that. One of the podcasts I like to listen to is a guy named Tim Ferriss, who a lot of people know from
mhm.
his book, The 4 Hour Work Week. And he wrote that book. I guess it's been about 10 years now. And he talks about how people are just now discovering it. And he still gets tweets about things like, hey, I'm trying to A/B test a landing page. What do I do? And he's just like, oh man, I don't even want to talk about this stuff anymore.
I know.
But it's true. It's even a book that in his case has sold probably millions of copies. People are
Mhm.
still just discovering it
Yeah,
for the first time. So,
exactly.
so Mary Lou, I've got about 17 days worth of questions, and I know we have limited time. So I like to just to set context. Most, as you probably know, most of the listeners here on this podcast are obviously in the sales world. More specifically, I like to target the startup selling world. Startup
Mhm.
CEOs, startup teams, which I know is an area that's near and dear to your heart as well. Beyond all the work you've done with big companies like Apple and other Fortune 1000 companies with your company. Um, and by the way, I've already introduced you before you got on the line, so I wanted to get right into it.
That's
Um,
fine.
yeah, so if you don't mind, maybe we could just jump into a couple of really specific tactical questions that I have, and then just take the conversation from there. Would that be okay?
That's fine. That's great.
Cool. So I'll start off, I guess, in the beginning of the book, you've divided the book into three sections. You've got um, target is the first section, and then the second section is oh, I just lost my notes. Tell us about the top three sections of the book.
It's target, it's engage, and then it's optimize. Those are the three sections of the book. And
And
it's
in the
akin to assembling, activating, and optimizing your sales pipeline.
Okay, great. So one of the things that in the first place I really wanted to start with is in that target section where you talk about this concept of internalizing your competitive position.
Mhm.
And this is interesting to me because I feel like too often we sit salespeople in seats and we say, hey, call this person or call this list. And you just sort of expect a salesperson who has presumably done sales before to know how to sell the product or they to know how to ask questions. And then even more so, I think there's also, at least in my experience, sometimes there's this natural tension between product teams and sales teams. So the product team may have gone out and done some competitive analysis and customer development. The sales team has not been privy to that, long, deep kind of analysis. And so first, if you would, maybe explain for the listeners a little bit about this process of internalizing your competitive position. And second, I would like to maybe hear your opinion as to why you feel like salespeople might not be considered more often or brought into that competitive analysis during the product development phase.
Well, the SWOT section, which is what you're talking about, the first chapter, which some of my colleagues have just ribbed me to no end, saying, Mary Lou, people need a PhD to read that chapter. And, I don't really think it's the case, but I found when I was out in the field that a lot of the companies I worked with, big and small, not just the startups, but even larger companies who may have decided to go in a different vertical or they have a new product that they're put a skunk work together that's like a startup. And we never went through this internal positioning piece, which really internalizes your strengths, your weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And the SWOT itself, which is what we used to use all the time back in the early days when I was in
Mm-hmm,
sales,
mm-hmm,
we that still wasn't comprehensive enough. So we did a 6-factor SWOT analysis that we describe in the book. And we took Salesforce as the company to give everybody an idea, the case study behind it. And then I also worked examples in the back of the book for those who are just like, just get me to the punchline, please. There's a guide in the back of the book that actually fills it out as again. And really, what this is doing is it's positioning in our mind our uniqueness, our oneness, the reason why we are who we are. And it also frames why buyers should choose us, why change now. And it really is all about that sense of urgency, but you're overlaying it with empathy towards the buyer themselves. So the first 3 chapters really focus on those people that you're going to be sitting what I call belly to belly, even though it's virtual. You're sitting across the table from them. Really, we're trying to get that first conversation or that follow on conversation started. And we have to somehow build trust and rapport and do all these things before we get on to that first conversation. So, that SWOT analysis is so important for us to really know what about us is unique that will let the buyer differentiate in his mind why they should talk to us.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I don't think you need a PhD to read the chapter. I do feel like I felt like, wow, I felt like this is technical in sort of a sales kind of way.
Mhm.
Though I think in terms my own opinion is that I think we've underserved the
Yes.
sales community
Yes.
by focusing too much on sort of the squishy thing, or here's how here are some email templates, copy and paste this and personalize it and send it out. That's how you sell. When in
Mhm.
fact,
Right.
that's tip of the iceberg. There hasn't been enough training, I believe, for the sales person, for the sales community to know like, no, this sales is hard stuff. There's a reason why it's
Mhm.
hard to sell your stuff. And the six
Yes.
factor analysis that you mentioned, I think if anything, it should open the eyes of the salesperson and say, oh, this is not just I walk in the office and call people. It's the calling people is the last thing you do. And most of the work comes from really understanding the customer.
Right. And I will tell you that of the emails I get a lot of pushback from people saying, do I really need to do this chapter, Mary Lou? And the reason why they ask me that is because it's the hardest thing that you're going to do, but it's also the most impactful thing that you're going to do. And you're doing it all in this planning phase. So you're getting the psychology of the buyers figured out. You're figuring out why they should change, why now, why you. You're figuring out if I shook you at 3 in the morning and said, why do you matter with this product? You'd be able to tell me from your heart, from your soul, because you've done this work. And that's the only way that you're going to be able to get on the phone with conviction, with emotion, with passion, and be able to guide your buyer towards the solution you know in your heart is the best solution for them.
Yeah, and even for me, my perspective on it is that yes, it's hard. I think even more so, it's scary for people because what they're going to do is realize that they don't understand their customer, they don't understand the market because especially in the startup world. Well, I think, but whether it's a startup world or a large company, if you're in the large company, you're the salesperson. I think you just sort of assume that the product people did the work and you should just be able to go out and sell it. And secondly, going back to the startup world, I think a lot of times that founder or that founding team, they fall in love with the product and they hide behind the product and just assume, oh, I'm just going to build this product and people will be able to see how good it
Hmm.
is. And so
Yes.
that's why I say it's scary to go back and do this research and go like, oh my gosh, I actually don't know. Like you've got this one part of your six factor model, the VUCA factors,
Hmm.
volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous, to actually sit there and think about a customer and go through that analysis of those four factors. It's scary to think I don't know
Right.
the answer to that question.
Right. No, you're absolutely right. You're hitting all of the hot buttons, all the reasons why that chapter opens the book, why we firmly believed it's one of the chapters that you must take to heart. And you can grab your team if you're in a company, grab whoever touches the customer and the prospects and bring them into a room and hash it out because you'll have a multitude of different opinions, but you'll come together as one, which is what we need, especially when we start going down the rabbit hole of content assets, emails, all of the voicemails, all the things that we do in our languaging revolve around that first piece.
Yeah, I'm curious in the work that you've done, either with startups or larger companies, could you give me an example of watching a team go through this and really struggling with it?
Yes, I mean, I just worked with a client, a small startup in San Francisco, and they had a product marketing team. They also had a marketing team. We invited them in. I was brought in by sales, and the CEO was in there. And what I typically do is I have a room where I can get those sticky things that you hang up on the wall. So we
Yeah.
work through each of the factors, and they're the big pieces of paper with sticky edges. So I write down everything, and then so we do really well with the strengths. But because we do this six-factor strength analysis, it allows us to get strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats really comprehensively done. Whereas if we just did a standard SWOT, everybody just sort of peters out on the opportunities and threats areas. The six factor allows us to continually bring to the forefront the true priorities. Where it gets fun and where it gets very spirited is when we need to rank and prioritize what goes in the final SWOT. And it's amazing how much we have to usually break for a while, go away, and then come back. It's not a one and done type of session. It can be pretty spirited and pretty crazy after a while, especially as we get into the why.
So if I'm a startup team or I'm a team leader or a CEO or a founder and I decide I want to take on this kind of process or I want to initiate this exercise, when you say take a break, is that just an hour? Is that a week? What would you recommend the best way? Because this is technical, it's going to take some heavy thinking. What would you
Well,
recommend for
you know,
somebody trying to implement this?
I've done immersions where we do it in a day and a half, and I've done
Hmm.
virtuals where we work for 3 hours and then go away for a few days and then come back. I kind of like the going away for a few days because your subconscious gets to work on resolving the conflicts that you have. And
Hmm.
some people will maybe even go off and research a little bit more competitor information. Maybe they'll look at their surveys at a larger company, their NPS scores, the loyalty scores, things like that they didn't bring to the first meeting. So I'm a little bit of a proponent of giving it some rest. It's just like when you write really good copy, you write the page of copy, you let your subconscious noodle it over for a few days, you come back, you make edits. I think that works the best.
Okay. So let's say we've done this exercise on a startup team, and now I've done the heavy lifting. Now I've got all of these issues out
Mhm.
on the table. And as we kind of move through the book a little bit, you then start talking about developing an ideal account profile, which is chapter 2. And you've mentioned these three ways to define that: firmographic, operational, and situational. And I wanted to ask you about this because, especially for startups, say you're trying to find your first 10 enterprise customers or even your first 100. I feel like too often I see companies that are scattered across too many industries, or they're trying to cover, well, we solve this problem for that industry and this problem for this industry. And what I try to tell them is like, look, you'll never again have the luxury of only needing to get 10 customers. Like, this is actually a luxury,
Yeah.
first of all. And second of all, if you can't find 10 customers in one market, industry, segment, niche, whatever, like, you've got bigger problems. So
Yes.
what advice would you give to a startup, or what advice do you give to early, whether it's an early stage team or even a new product group in a larger company, as you're thinking about this ideal account profile? How does a company get out of this mindset or overcome the mental block or hurdle that I've got to solve? I'm going to solve a lot of problems for a lot of companies. Instead, I got to be super disciplined in just focusing on the first 10 or the first 100.
The easiest way I've found to get people to acquiesce, and this is usually a C suite issue, not necessarily a sales issue. The C suite thinks they can sell a product to everyone. So I'm
Mm,
going on record saying that because I've seen it a lot.
agreed.
What I suggest that they do is they create tiers, like draw the bullseye. Like we have a bullseye for prospect personas for a different application, but I like to draw tiers of accounts. In the bullseye are the true and accounts that are the ones you really want to go after. So because they're in the bullseye, there's a smaller number of them. Then you go one ring out, and those are the accounts that could have been in the bullseye, but they were missing some criteria that you felt would differentiate them enough that any content assets or any way to chase them would be a little bit too diverse. So that's the
Mm,
next ring out. And then the third ring out is everybody else. And that way we cover all the accounts for the C suite, but we organize them in the way that allows us to really focus on in the core, which is the core accounts you're going after. And then the next level out, I call it the extended universe, because that could be good accounts that are high revenue, high likelihood of closing, but for some reason they're missing one or two maybe of the criteria that you set aside for the core
mm.
accounts. But the core accounts are really high profile, high revenue, and high likelihood of closing. Those are the criteria, and that's still left over from predictable revenue.
Yeah. So how do I stay disciplined if I'm that startup CEO, and maybe it could be something like an introduction or maybe even an inbound lead, or my team or I are at a conference and we meet somebody who's not in that core part of your bullseye, and it's so tempting because you need those early customers, you want those proof points, you want to be able to say you have a customer and revenue. I just had this yesterday. I sat down with a CEO who said she she's doing about $12,000 a month, and she said, but the problem is most of that revenue is coming from customers who are not our ideal
Mhm.
base. And so we need
Mhm.
to transition, and that's a hard thing to do already. And so what advice do you give to that CEO or that founding team to stay disciplined when you have, in many cases, these other opportunities that sometimes are even coming knocking on your door?
Well, it's that whole maximizing return on effort. What is that formula that you've agreed to? And it's the ability to say no, it's not a good fit for us at this time. The other thing is, can you leverage some of those accounts with technology versus human? So that way, if for the cold calling perspective or outreach perspective, those tiers that I just talked about, we may have a more personalized campaign for the core accounts, but the extended universe, we're going to leverage technology to go after. So I think it's a mix of leveraging technology and people as to whether you want to spend time working on a particular account. But it's also that tried and true statistic of high revenue potential with high likelihood of closing. If it's not fitting in that criteria, then leverage technology as much as you can, but make sure that it's a degree of personalization that works with the profile of those accounts in whatever ring they're in.
Okay, makes sense. So let's say we've done some of these exercises, we've done the targeting,
Mhm.
and now we're moving ahead into the next kind of phase, the engage part of the predictable prospecting. And so this is where you talked about crafting the right message here in chapter 4, and you're right about finding the pain and using another kind of MBA-ish term. You mentioned McKinsey's mutually exclusive,
Yeah.
collectively exhaustive, which I was like, wow, that's a mouthful. It took me a minute to think about this, the MECE. And then
Easy.
you recommended building an issue tree.
Mhm.
Um, and you mentioned an example of a chief marketing officer who has this stated problem of, hey, how do I increase my ROI? So this issue tree, it's interesting to me. I've referred to something similar called root cause analysis or 5 whys analysis. And so for the person listening to this, first, like, could you just talk about the issue tree and why it's important for a salesperson to work through that with
Sure.
your target once you've defined it?
Yes. Let me just say one thing before we move to that. And regarding the persona, chapter 3, some of you may come away from this call thinking, oh, marketing's done our personas. Good. We can check that off the list. I just want to make sure that you know that that is not the case, because the call to action of a marketing persona is a marketing qualified lead. A call to action for a persona for sales for us at top of funnel is the first meeting, face to face, belly to belly, whatever you want to call it, or the follow up event, whether we're doing a disqualification call and are we a fit call. So I would take chapter 3 if you have a marketing or product persona already built, and then add to it for sales, because it's not the same thing. Now that document feeds into what we are going to talk about now, which is that issue tree. And the reason why that feeds in so nicely is because the issue trees are done by persona. So once we've got the persona, that becomes the inputs to both our cadences, our sequences, our issue trees, our question trees, all of the things we talk about in the book. Now, the issue tree is fun because we have to also worry about, when we're doing outreach, levels of awareness of our prospect. They are not coming inbound to us, they are not searching for us. So, by definition, of the 5 levels of awareness, unaware through most aware, when you're coming inbound, you're going to be product aware probably and most aware because you did a search for us. When we're going outreach, we're disrupting, we're interrupting, we're delightfully coming into their world with our message. And so we are also at the levels of unaware, problem aware, and solution aware. So we have to make sure that the issue tree deals with the questions in the prospect's head at each of those levels of awareness. And we have to be able to not only meet them where they're at, answer their objection that they don't know they have, but also be able to direct them and guide them towards an outcome that they can expect for something that they hadn't even thought about.
Hmm.
That's where the issue tree comes in.
Okay. Interesting. So in that section, you mentioned one of your trademark ideas, which is compel with content.
Mhm.
Um, how does that, like, talk about that concept a little bit, and how does that relate to this issue tree, especially when I'm doing the outbound and trying to reach a market that may be unaware and certainly maybe even not even aware of their own problem.
Right. What we're trying to do with the issue tree and with the compel with content is organize our content for email, for voicemail, for actual scripts, conversational scripts, in a way so that we can better predict where our prospect is in his head. So we have to be able to utilize compel with content to state a problem or challenge, keeping those levels of awareness in mind, then contrasting that challenge to the happily ever after outcome that they could have. And then from there, that's the emotional aspect of getting them in the depths of despair and then immediately bringing them to nirvana. And then we switch over to a logical portion of the framework, which says now you got to show specificity and proof that you are the right guide to take me to the next step. And then finally, the next step is the call to action that goes inside the email. So that whole framework, Compel with Content, has 5 different constructs that no matter whether your email is 80 words or 480 words, it has to have each of those components in it.
Okay. So what's the biggest mistake that you see most startups or most teams make at this? Because this is really where like everything else is back office, if you will. I'm doing my research. I'm figuring out what the message should be. I'm doing my targeting. Right now, I'm doing the work. I'm starting to sell by going out and getting in front of people. What are maybe the biggest mistakes or the top 3 mistakes you see teams make all the time in this part of the sales process?
The first one that is irritating is you're making me figure out why I should listen to you, as
Tell
opposed
me more about
to,
that.
well, you are telling me features of your product and giving me no reason why that should affect me. You spout off saying, we do this, we did that, we have this, we have that. And I'm supposed to make that connection as to why it's important to me. Why should I care? I see that all the time in cold emails. It's inexcusable. That's one area. The second area is if I find a favorite subject line that the other people are using, I'll clone it and really not give this thought to how I'm differentiating myself, even at the subject line level. So you're lazy. You're using subject lines. You may have looked them up and say, oh, this one works. And it doesn't relate to the body of the email. It's just, that's not a good thing either. So those are 2 that I see all the time. And then the third one is consistently not following a structure to add value. So every email, it's like, did you get my message? Do you want to have an appointment? I sent you an email 3 days ago. Would you like to have an appointment now?
Oh man, I have a tag in my Gmail called bad emails. And so I just pulled one up. So February 14th, hey Scott, I hope development on sales quality is going well and you're having a great 2017. We can't believe it's already February. Here at blah, blah company, we help quite a few startups, blah, 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 right? So then the next day, hey Scott, quick follow-up here. Reply with a yes if you want to meet us. Day after that, hey Scott, just a quick follow-up here. Reply with the number from the list below. Number 1, you're all set. Number 2, you're interested. Number 3, you're being chased by a hippo. Like I get these all the time, and it is very, very frustrating. But on the other hand, people must be getting these strategies from somewhere. Otherwise, they wouldn't be using them, right?
Correct. And, we meaning Aaron and I, get blamed a lot from predictable revenue because some of those emails are very predictable revenue-esque.
Yeah.
But the thing is that was then. The predictable revenue was released in 2011. It's a case study.
Yeah.
I think it was 2003. Times have changed. So we have to be able to be a student of what's working now, study and write emails that are value driven. And that's where the compel with content came from. The frustration of seeing these emails over and over again, people not thinking through, how can I add value to Marylou's day? How can I transform Marylou's day? How can I get her so she's leaning into my email? Like my client that called me, and I'll give you an example. My client called me and said, Marylou, did you have this vendor send me this email? And I'm like, tell me about the email. So he read the email. The first sentence just hit him between the eyes. It got that pain point that that was bubbling up to the top for him. He and
What's
I
it?
had
Do
had
you
a good.
remember the actual wording? I would love to hear it if you remember it.
Oh, I'll have to get it and we can include it in
Okay.
the show notes. But
Okay.
it was about the pain of setting up a marketing automation system. I remember because that's what we were talking about. And then poof, 3 days later comes this email. So my client called me up and said, "Did you have them send it to me?" And I said, "No." But that is a perfect example of that issue tree, hitting them right between the eyes of that pain point, and then beautifully getting it from the depth of despair and giving me a contrast to what life could be like. And that you're my guide. You're going to show me how to get there. There's some bumps along the way that we'll probably experience together. But if you'll give me the time, then I will be able to show you how others have done it, both from an initial step, a mid step, and finally the happily ever after step. Now, that doesn't all go
So,
in one email, but that's the gist of what we're trying to do.
and how far should one go in that initial email? So, like, let's say you're chief marketing officer, example here from the book, and
Mhm.
the top line issue is how do I increase my ROI, and then you've got these additional questions below that. Um, like on the one hand, you could ask a very general question: Are you wasting? How are you calculating the ROI of
Mhm.
your marketing campaign? Versus, I don't know. I guess I'm trying to figure out like how direct should you be, and is it okay to be too aggressive? Like where's the line there?
I think it really depends on your personality. I'm teaching a class right now to some brave students who are actually going through the course with me on predictable prospecting. It's been really fun. But what we talked about was that whole direct versus indirect. I think it depends on your personality. At my age now, I'm a bit more direct than I used to be. I cut to the chase a lot more now than I used to. In the Midwest, though, I'm still very respectful of my prospects here because it is about respect in the Midwest. It's about having coffee, sitting down, discussing family. You got to take your time. On the coast, it's more directive. So I've learned how my prospects are in each of the locales in my world. It may not make any sense to your world for your prospect, but it really is going to be focused on how your prospect likes to be sold to, how they like to consume information, how often they like to be interrupted in their day. And if you've got a good rhythm and you feel like you're adding value with every step, then do it. They'll tell you if it's too much.
Okay, we are off and running with my conversation with Marylou Tyler. Thanks so much for listening to the Startup Selling Podcast. This is Scott Sambucci, as you know, and one of the things I want to do really quickly is draw your attention to the work that I do with startups. In particular, I work with B2B enterprise startups, and I help them to start up, ramp up, and scale up their sales process. What I found over and over and over in my 15 plus years in Silicon Valley is that many, many times, very high impact, very good products, very strong companies oftentimes fail or never reach their true potential simply because they haven't figured out the sales side of their product, of their market. And so I help startups to find customers, grow revenue, and build the repeatable, scalable sales process. So if you are a startup and you've been struggling with sales, you've been growing, but not growing at the pace you need to, or you're feeling like you're grinding away at this sales thing, give me a call. Give me an email, shoot me an email, send me a text, do whatever you need to do to get in touch, and let's have a quick chat. Let's see if we can find out some of the quick wins we can identify for you with your company, with your startup. You can identify some gaps or risks that you might have going forward over the next 6 to 12 months, and we'll get you fixed up. So again, give me a shout. My phone number is 415-596-0804. Shoot me a text right now, 415-596-0804. And in that text, just say, hey, let's have a chat, and I'll get back to you. We'll set up something on the calendar really quickly. Or you can head over to my website, salesqualia.com. That's sales, Qualia, Qualia.com. You can read a bunch of blog posts. I've got videos there, all kinds of free resources as well if you're the kind of person that likes to learn on their own. So that's it for now. On the commercial side of things, let's get back to the conversation with Marylou Tyler. Okay. So on the just come back to my notes here. So we're sending out these emails and we're compelling them with content. One of the contrasts you use is when to use mass personalized emails versus say hyper
Yes.
personalized emails. And this is another conundrum, especially in the startup phase, right, where you don't necessarily have a team of SDRs, you don't have any salespeople, you are the one doing the emails. And so obviously to do hyper personalized emails takes sometimes a lot more time because might have to go to a LinkedIn profile. And even if one email takes you 3 to 5 minutes, then you're only going to be able to send 20 emails over the course of a couple hours before your eyes start to bulge out of your head, and you need to take a break. So, like, how do I balance that between I need to reach out to those people in my target in that bullseye? On the other hand, I just don't have a lot of time. Like maybe I've got 10 hours a week to do my selling, and I can't waste. Maybe it's not wasting, but do I spend 3-4 hours doing 40 emails? Like, how do I make that decision, or how do I know when to do mass personalized versus non-personalized versus hyper personalized? Maybe talk me through that a little bit.
Sure. I like to look at it as if, grab a piece of paper and draw your pipeline, a schematic, a back of napkin kind of thing. And if you subscribe to predictable revenue, then you have a cold queue, a working queue, and maybe a qualifying queue. Those are the three areas that accounts are sitting positionally along your pipeline. As you move further down into the funnel, the more personalization is really necessary because you are building rapport and trust with your prospect. And so giving them some flattery or however you open up your email is important. But those are also the locations where you should have templated emails ready to go, where you personalize one aspect of it, and then the rest of it is your unique selling proposition that we worked on in chapters 1 through 3. And that way you can build on the story that you're doing, fill in the components that are specific to the persona, and still have your value proposition, the reason why, the call to action, all of that already done for you that you can just edit. The other thing I like to do is, since you know where these accounts are positionally in your pipeline, the day before, when you are working in that block of time that's not great for phone calls, that's when you do your research on these accounts and have them served up and ready to go. So when you come in the next day, you can work through
Mm.
the actual email sequence one after another. So you're single tasking that event.
Yeah, it's batch processing
Yep.
in a way.
Yep.
Yeah, yeah. That's I was working with a team, 8 salesperson team, and they were really struggling with. Well, it takes me really long time to do this prospecting, and I said, well, just walk me through what you're doing, and they were doing the full assembly line for doing research, drafting the email, sending the email, doing the research, draft the email, send the email. So the very simple thing we did was what you just described, which is okay. Let's find a couple blocks of time, say two or three 2-hour blocks throughout the week, like you said. Maybe it's early in the morning, late Friday afternoon, whatever those times are where the phone is not going to be too productive. Do your research, then you're just banging it out like a checklist.
And since we have these records positionally in the pipeline, the cold people still, in my opinion, are mass personalized. Then the working people, which you usually have 20 to 40 accounts in there, those are going to be hyper personalized. And then the qualification people, if you're still sending emails, are definitely personalized. So that way you're only doing 20 a day ish if you work every day and sending into your working queue, but you're also calling. So you shouldn't be just sending email to those 20 records. You should also be calling.
Yeah, I was writing down in my notes. So the cold list is the mass personalized,
Yeah, because think
right?
of
The ones
record size. Record size drives personalization, in my opinion. If your the list is largest when you're in the cold queue because you haven't had a conversation with them yet. That's the definition of the cold queue. You either haven't found the right person or you haven't begun conversations with them. Once you've validated that you're talking with the right folks, you move those records over to working status. And those are usually 20 to 40 accounts. That hasn't changed since predictable revenue. That's still the same. You work those 20 accounts as a queue. So if you had like Salesforce, you build a view of your working accounts. You come in the morning, you organize them by last activity. You start at the top, you work your way down during the block time that's good for phone calls. And then the same thing, the block time that's good for emailing, you do the same thing.
Got it. So the cold is mass personalized, working is hyper personalized, and then the third group.
Qualification, if you do send emails, not very many people do. Those are hyper personalized. And then nurture is all technology driven. So it's definitely,
Yeah.
so that's how I start when I'm working with a client who is overwhelmed with personalization. It's because they haven't really thought of it from the standpoint of record numbers. You can only physically do so many, and you want to work it backwards. You want to work the people in qualification first, then work working, then work cold, because
Mhm.
you want to push people or gently pull people into the pipeline and get them towards opportunity. So you should always
Yeah.
work your work day backwards like that.
Yeah. And you mentioned about this way of aligning your day and the order and how to use these different campaigns. Just for the listeners, there's a really excellent table in chapter 5, which is an 8-touch, 13 business day outbound campaign. So it's a wonderful recipe to just know, like, if you can always you can always craft it and sort of mold it to be your own. But if you're starting from scratch, this is just a really simple checklist to say, let me set this up, this 8-touch, 13-day outbound campaign, and at least then you know you've got a really good, clear process for this part of your outbound prospecting.
Yes, and you hit the nail on the head. This book is benchmarks and giving you overall structure and architecture. What you come away from applying what's in this book is your unique model. It's not going to be what this book shows. It's going to be your own unique model, but you're going to start here so that you have a benchmark to improve against.
Yeah, and there's a couple of later in the book, I want to get to a couple of the studies that you did around sales development reps and number of calls and number of appointments. Just a minute, and so before we do that, I have one more question in kind of this middle part of the book around getting meetings.
Mhm.
And in chapter 5, you mentioned a customer referral program, and this is something that I've personally, I guess I've struggled with myself, and I know that other startups struggle with it for a couple of reasons. One is, what if you don't have many customers? You're a startup, so it's hard to have a customer referral program unless I'm thinking about it the wrong way. And two, what if my early customers are competitive? They don't want to introduce me. If I'm like, for me, I sold to mortgage lenders, particularly top 50 mortgage lenders. So if I'm selling to, say, Nation Star, they don't want to just like refer me over to their best friend at Prime Lending because they're competing in the market. So how does is it possible? And if so, I'm assuming it's possible. You probably got some strategy for it. I would love to hear how a startup could put together some kind of customer referral program, because the numbers that you show in your book are clearly favoring the ability to really ramp up sales using a referral program of some kind.
Right. And I think in the book too, we talk about indirect versus direct referrals. It's just that same bullseye concept is you have your target in the middle. The first level out are his direct referrals, but there's also vendors and other players who interface with your client, with whom you can get connections with. And they may have other clients that they work with that they can refer you in, as long as they're a companion vendor. So I like to
Mm-hmm.
have programs where I'm constantly looking in and around my bullseye of direct and indirect referral sources and setting the tone ahead of, at the start of the engagement or at the start of our conversing, that I'd really like to get to know who else they work with and get in the style in which they work. And then I start building relationships there as well. So by the end of it all, it's like if you're a LinkedIn person, this first, second, third link, third degree, whatever. I
Sure.
work a lot of my second degree people because, the first folks are already directly connected to me, but I'm also looking for people outside of that universe with whom I
Mm-hmm.
can start a relationship with. And it's always based on you go in there and the question is, how can I help you? Not who can help me. That's the difference between a referral program that works. It's how can I serve you? And you have to
Mm-hmm.
come up with ways to do that. So that planning up front and that SWOT you can see is propagating throughout.
Yeah, I was just thinking about that, because beyond just understanding the customer motivation, it's also understanding the systems and the customer's technology stack. For example,
Mhm.
if you're selling a SaaS product, and understanding what other products that are most likely to be used by your target customer. So I was just thinking practically, like if I'm at a conference like SaaStr or an industry event, and I could just walk the exhibit hall and just spend an hour or two talking to each target kind of booth person
Mhm.
there and say, look, it looks like you guys are selling to the same customer. Here's what I'm thinking. We're doing outreach in this part of the market. Maybe we can help you with leads, vice versa. And that could be the genesis of
Yes.
a referral program that it's not necessarily you're paying customers, but maybe it's a partnership or some kind of even reseller arrangement down the road.
It's another arm, it's another channel. That's the way I look at it. And I did the very same thing when we released this book. I went to a trade show and I had been sort of in a cave for the last 5 years because Aaron was really more of the client facing person and I was more in the background. But this book forced me to get out there and get out of my introverted lifestyle and actually meet people. So I walked up and down the booth and I introduced myself. Said I'm available to do a webinar. It looks like your client base would utilize some of the principles in this book. I can most certainly put together something. I had so many people take me up on that, and they have referred so much to me as the result of it. It's just a really great way if you offer services first, offer to help first, be completely respectful of their timelines, not yours, then
Mhm.
eventually it's going to come back to you and it's going to come back bigger than you ever thought.
You just said something really interesting, Mary Lou, that's not even related to the book, and I want to ask you about this. You consider yourself an introvert,
Most
and
definitely.
so I hear this all the time, and people are shocked when I tell them this. Like I consider myself an introvert, as outgoing as I am in
Mhm.
the public domain. It's really hard for me to kind of get up to do that, and a lot of founders are oftentimes technical. They've not been in a situation they've had to do a lot of presentations or public speaking, and certainly not in situations where now as the CEO of the company, they're meeting with senior executives at their target company. And so there's this sense of like, I'm an introvert. I can't do sales. Could you talk about that a little bit and how I feel like that's just a really, um, it's an unfair sort of characterization that to be a good salesperson, you must be an extrovert. Can you talk through that,
Oh,
please?
sure. No, I mean, I think it's just the opposite. I think because we are wired to be consultative in nature. I'm an engineer. I came up as a software developer. I used to work on operating system code for Xerox and Honeywell. So I definitely prefer to be like the pizza under the door coding at 3 in the morning kind of person. But I also love to solve problems. That's just my nature. So when I hear somebody, and I'm a great listener, being an introvert means you're a great listener, I think. And because of that, you're not constantly interrupting the client. You are listening, you're hearing, you're watching their tonality. There's a lot going on so that you become more endearing because you hear them and you respond in a way that says, tell me more, tell me more. So I think introverts are exceptional salespeople because we're not in a rush. We are
Mm,
really thinking about what's best for the customer, what's best for the prospect, how can I truly help them? And if I can't help them, I will be the first to let them know that because I don't want to waste their time either. So there's a little bit of, I think, of an empathy that exists in introverts and the ability to
mhm.
listen. Those two things, which are so important in today's sales. I mean, more than ever, those are the characteristics that we're looking for. Now, not to say that I can't negotiate for the close. I don't have a lot of experience in negotiation, but so I can't really speak to whether introverts are good or not at that. But definitely in starting the conversation, in creating and crafting a a series of stories that lead and guide a prospect from where they are now, where they really, really need to go, and how we're going to take them there. We're really good at that.
That's cool. I'm really glad to hear you talk through those things because I agree. I think especially just a natural curiosity, being
Yes.
a research oriented person is fundamental. It serves it serves to the benefit of being in sales because it's the idea of doing root cause analysis. Well, tell me about that problem. Why is that? Why is that a
Right.
problem? Why is that a problem? The natural curiosity is going to get you to the customer's root problem. much more so than, oh, yeah, 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 great, great. Let me just show you the demo now.
Right. And in the front
Just,
of my book, I give to my daughter, I give her a shout out saying, for all those times we were in an airport and you were rolling your eyes as I was asking, I was just curious about what people do for a living. And I would talk to strangers, this is just like, this is the reason why your mother wrote this book, Nikki. So I totally get it. Yeah.
yeah,
We are
that's
very
really interesting.
curious, eternally curious for sure.
So we got a couple minutes left. I wanted to ask you a couple quick questions so that towards the end of the book, you've got some really nice data around um, metrics that historically have been useful, or at least historically looking at, for example, appointment setting rates for sales development reps,
Mhm.
how many calls an SDR should make on a daily basis, those sorts of things. I was frankly, I didn't know, I guess, what to expect, but I was surprised that the number of appointments set per day, you've got a graph here in chapter 7, and it looks like it's, about one appointment per day based on making approximately 75 or 76 outbound touches. Did I read that right?
This is work that was, I think, let me think about this. Is this upmarket? It may be that this is in the accounts that are more complex sales, but
Okay.
really the formula that we use this formula, but we also look at the old predictable revenue formula, which is 5 meaningful conversations a day, which is almost
Mhm.
like 100 meaningful conversations a month, will yield 8 to 10 opportunities. So
Okay.
and that formula is also based on sending 1,000 unique emails out. Now, predictable revenue is really based on the one email. Now we're doing sequences, and so the numbers should be
Mhm.
better in terms of response rates and things. But yeah, that's about right. About
Okay.
right.
So oh, five meaningful conversations leads to 8 to 10
Yeah.
opportunities.
So really, if you work it backwards, it was 8 to 10 ops, 10 to 15 kind of demo discovery, 2 hour type calls where you're doing a demo. And,
Hmm.
that's 10 to 15, 100 conversations get you to that 10 to 15. And then the email helps to find the right person, but it's really up to you to do the AWAF call, which is the Are We a Fit call. And in the predictable revenue book, we had a 315 process, which 15 minutes was the AWAF call, Are We a Fit? 1 hour discovery call with the one decision maker, and then a 2 hour call with the team, the prospect team.
Mm.
And so those are, it's really funny. Predictable revenue is not really looked at as a complex sale or account based selling, but it really was because the 3 hour 15 process from the first conversation to qualified op is more of a complex sale.
Sure, sure. And I think it's a good formula for just demonstrating something as simple as, which oftentimes gets glossed over as a startup founder or CEO is, well, I have this contact and I'm doing a demo for them and they're going to show it to their team, or they said, send me the deck and they're going to show it to their team, where it's critical just by the way you described that. The first demo might be with one person, the second meeting should be with the team
Right.
over there. And people oftentimes forget that, or they just don't know, if they've never done sales, the importance of sort of spreading the communication web between your company and their company to talk to more stakeholders. And it seems really simple for people that have done sales for a long period of time, but for somebody that's new, they oftentimes rely on that one vice president that they met at the conference and they feel like that person's going to do all the selling for them internally.
Yes, and I think that is, like you said, it's a skills issue. It's not really understanding their process, and that's why before we start activating anything, we plan through the process because we set up those metrics that are in the latter part of the book to correlate to the sales conversations that we're going to have to get to a qualified op. So that thing you just mentioned would come out as part of, oh, well, we really want to involve more stakeholders and we want the BDRs or the SDRs to be involved in that before the handoff so that there's more of a continuity there. Plus, we don't want to bring the AE in and use that resource until we know we have a consensus amongst the prospects in that company that it's a good idea to move forward. I see that
Yeah.
a lot of dropping the ball there. One of the easiest areas for me to fix when I go in and look at pipelines is that sales qualified lead, which is generated usually by the BDR, SDR, to sales accepted lead, which is accepted by the um, the AE, quota carrying person, if you have a separation of roles, that number should be 90%. When I come in and look, that's the first thing I look for. It's somewhere in the 40 to 60% range. I know there's a problem with qualification.
Mm, interesting. What kind of qualification framework do you subscribe to? I think you mentioned BANT in your book.
We're agnostic, but BANT is the easiest for us
Yeah.
because, they can take, once again, we're giving you a model, a baseline, a benchmark that's worked for so many years and really has a good foundation. But you decide to what level the budget goes. You decide to what level the timing goes. But there are needs to find out whether there's funding in some cases and whether there's a
Yeah.
timing issue in some cases. And really, I had one client where we had three different bands because they sold what we call buying scenarios. They sold the product three different ways depending on the prospect persona. So they didn't
Wow.
need all of the band requirements. So we had it all nicely set up in a matrix. The CRM tracked it all. So we knew which ones were going through at what velocity, which gave us, we were talking about before, what records to throw in the top of the funnel. We knew exactly which ones we wanted to work on in that targeted account because we could just mold it to say, okay, I want this many of these types of projects, this many of this thing. And we just fed the beast with the number of records that allowed us to get there.
Okay. That's interesting. Well, listen, Mary Lou, as we're wrapping up here, first of all, everyone who's listening to this, go get a copy of the book, Predictable Prospecting: How to Radically Increase Your B2B Sales Pipeline. We've just touched maybe 3% of the practical information that's in this book. Trust me, I've read a lot of sales books, and this is easily top three in terms of how practical it is. And many people listening to this, may not even know this name, but this is a big deal. Neil Rackham is one of the people that he is endorsed this book. Neil's book, Spin Selling, is one that 20 years ago I read and was a foundation to my sales career. Neil is like literally the professor, the sales professor, and he's endorsed this book. And I highly recommend. I don't know how you got to know Neil, but I'm so jealous that you know Neil so well that he's willing to endorse your book. That's so cool.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
definitely
quite
envious
an
that
honor for sure.
yeah. How did you get to know him?
Well, he is an author that works, his books were published by McGraw-Hill. My book is published by
Okay.
McGraw-Hill. So it's one of the benefits of being published by a publisher is that I got to interchange my ideas with him. And I've been a fan forever for Neil as well. I have
Yeah.
both of his books sitting on my desk still, Spin
Spin
Selling
selling
Field
and
book.
major account sales
Yep.
strategy, right?
Yeah. So,
Yep.
and the implication questions was the impetus or the reason why we built that implication tree. It's just
Oh, interesting.
basically, yeah, it is, if you can get and master one thing from this call and go grab Neil's book and learn how to ask an implication question, you are going to be so far ahead of everybody else in the field.
Mhm.
It's just a
Yeah,
great,
and I think
great way.
yeah, and it also I think it's a testament to we talked at the top of the conversation about the idea of some of the models you have being sort of PhD and things like that. Sales, just like any profession, whether, engineering people talk about how different languages are built off the foundation of this other language that was developed 20 years ago. And sales is very much the same way. There's definitely a technical aspect to sales and the way we've learned and foundations that have been built 20, 30, 50 years ago, whether it's BANT qualification frameworks or the spin selling question framework that Neil developed. There's a progression. It's not a black box sort of voodoo science. There's some real work that goes into understanding how sales works, particularly in the B2B world. So, Marylou, before we let you go, are there any shout outs, any places? How can people? I'll put obviously your contact information in the show notes. I know you're on Twitter. You've got your phone number on your LinkedIn profile. People should definitely call you if they have questions and want some help. How else can people get a hold of you? And are there other websites or causes related to business or not that you want to give a shout out to so that people should go check out?
You could reach me on LinkedIn as with Marylou Tyler. Look me up there. I write I've written a lot of posts, one of which is really popular, which is the 7 healthy phone habits to get or to book more first meetings. So my background in telephony, I ran a 250-seat call center for a very long time. So I'm very phone centric and I love the phone. So I put a lot of tips out on my website of how to utilize the telephone. So if you guys want to check that out, there's a page called Swag, SWAG. So it's MarylouTyler.com/swag, where I've put trainings, webinars, additional worksheets. I mean, there's a whole plethora of stuff in and around the book that if you're a DIY person, you can grab all those worksheets and the SWOT's there, the ideal persona profile worksheet is there, the ideal account profile. So you can actually just
Oh man.
download all of that
Yeah.
and get going.
Yeah. This is you're giving this stuff away for free, and this is stuff that people should be willing to pay thousands of dollars for. This is really good. I'm on the website right now, checking this
Cool.
out.
Yeah, I'm definitely
Absolutely. I'll
here
add that to
as
the show notes.
I'm really here to be a mentor, a guide, and I really feel it's my duty to give back because I've had such a wonderful work uh, environment, life. I've just enjoyed working at top of funnel for these past going on 30 years now. So I'm here to help you guys excel in whatever way I can.
Well, if you have any doubts about giving Mary Lou a call or giving her a shout, pick up a copy of the book first, read it. Once you read it, you'll want to give her a call, I'm sure. And if anything, make sure you check out her website. It's MarylouTyler.com/swag. Mary Lou, it's been a hoot. I learned a ton reading your book. I've been, like I said, doing sales for 20 years, and I learned a ton. And now I feel like I've got a lot of work to do myself. So thank you for motivating me to get some work done on my own sales. And I so appreciate you taking the time to talk with me and to our audience, because this is just absolutely the kind of practical applications, the implementation of ideas that the community out there needs to hear. So thank you so much for taking the time.
And thank you, Scott, for having me. I really enjoyed it.
Good. Thanks, Mary Lou. We'll have to do it again soon.
Definitely.
Okay. We'll see you. Cheers. Cool. That's a wrap.
Okay. Very
Mary
good.
Lou, you're awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you for taking a full hour out of the day and sharing all this. I honestly, when was reading through your book over the last week, I was just like, oh man, there's so many things that I got to brush up on, because you just forget. You're just like, oh, I know how to
Yeah,
do this, I know how to do that, and
I
it's like
know.
anything. If you're not going back and refreshing and like, oh, that's a good model, and all those things. So
I do
it
hear
was
that a
like
lot. I hear about, oh, great refresher. I'm so glad you wrote that.
yeah, for sure. And I'll tell you, I mean, honestly, when I got to the part of the book with the phone system codes, I was like, oh man, that was really cool. That was like, I was totally geeking out on that piece as a salesperson who's had to deal with so many phone systems over the years.
All right, right. Yeah.
Um,
Well, I'm
well,
glad
cool.
it's good information for people. And that, I'm teaching that class now, so it's been so much fun because just going through the book and pulling out the things that I think would be impactful and just cramming it all into a 6-week class has been pretty fun, pretty amazing, pretty scary, all the above.
Yeah,
But
it just makes you realize like the depth that there
yeah,
is to what we do, and
I
trying to teach
know.
them. I mean, I do workshops all the time. People are like, tell me everything about sales, and I'm like, okay, how many years do you have
And I
to
just do,
do that?
those 3 stages and nurture, then I
Yeah,
can't imagine taking the whole pipeline on. That's just
I know.
amazing.
Yeah, well, good for you for choosing a niche. Maybe I
Yeah.
need to do that. Well, listen, again, thank you for the time. You'll probably get an email, well, you will get an email from Ziva. I always like to get feedback on how I can improve
Hmm.
on the podcast and any recommendations that you have. So if you wouldn't mind taking 5 or 10 minutes to just fill that out really quickly, I'd surely appreciate that. Production wise, usually takes about 2 weeks. I send this off to an audio engineer who just cleans it up and puts together the show notes and those kinds of things. So as soon as it gets up, I will let you know, and then you it would be great if you want to blast it out to your community.
Oh, definitely will.
For having
Yeah.
to listen.
I definitely like
So
to let all my tribe know. Someone posted something on LinkedIn the other day and I got just inundated with requests, which was great. So LinkedIn's a good spot for us to share our information for sure.
Yeah, I've had some good success there myself.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, good.
Cool.
All right, then. Thank you
All right,
again. I
Marylou.
really enjoyed it.
Yeah, thanks. That was a lot of fun. We'll do it again.
Okay.
All right, we'll see
Bye
you.
now.
Well, there you have it. My interview, my conversation with Marylou Tyler. I was really excited, as I mentioned, to have Marylou join the podcast because she's obviously been super successful across the sales spectrum, not just with startups, but with enterprise companies and enterprise sales teams all over the world, literally. So thanks so much for listening. A couple things you could do that I would surely appreciate. One is if you have made it this far in the podcast, then it means that you probably enjoyed the episode. So could you go over, please, could I ask you, please, could you go over to iTunes and leave a quick review? Because this helps the community out in iTunes for people searching for podcasts around sales and startups. It helps to bubble this podcast up to the top and helps iTunes recommend this podcast to people that are looking for this kind of content. So please go ahead and leave a review. And the second thing I'd love for you to do is go over to my company's Facebook page, facebook.com/salesqualia, QUALIA.com. And just go ahead and like that page. I'm posting more and more content there every single day, every single week, everything from doing Facebook Lives on sales tips, posting blog posts that I've done, articles from people like Marylou, tips and tricks on the sales side of things, on the startup strategy side of things. So getting yourself just liking that Facebook page at facebook.com/salesqualia will get you access to all that information right there in your Facebook feed. So that's it for now. Thanks so much for listening. This is Scott Sambucci, and you've been listening to the Startup Selling Podcast, Talking Sales with Scott Sambucci.